the two brands that are most like synonymous, quintessential. When you think sports, you think Nike and you think Gatorade.
Kind of dungeon that Michael Jordan did his sweat test in. I mean, stuff where you're just like, is this real? Is this my life? Yeah. And that's the hard part about building a brand is just, you're paying for all of those a little bit, not giving up, a lot of conviction, a lot of belief that I can do what I wanted to do. And they say luck is kind of the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And it was kind of me being in the right place at the right time.
All right. Welcome to the Eden Group podcast. I am joined today by Chris Hintermeister. Chris, we have a mutual colleague who introduced us, and I'm very excited to have you on the show. I want to start by going through the jobs that you've had listed on your LinkedIn, and I want to hear about the through line for these jobs. And our viewers will recognize a couple of these names, and one in particular that relates to the health and wellness industry. So starting at Ford Motor Company, you're there for a year. Then you were at Iconoculture, then Explore Information Systems, and then I'm going to butcher this name, Auditex. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, Auditex. What does Auditex do?
They are an auto insurance supplier of data analytics and professional services. So They cater to claims departments and underwriters. Unless you know a bunch about insurance, it's over. It's not the most exciting industry, which is one of the reasons why I ultimately pivoted out of it. But
I got you. You're there for 1 year. I'm sure it's a great company. Then you're at PepsiCo for 8 years. And specifically, were you with the Gatorade group at PepsiCo, or did you float around there?
I was with Gatorade for 6 years, and it's really where I think this conversation is relevant, because it kind of put me in, at least from a corporate standpoint, much more of a formal health and wellness, fitness trajectory.
Absolutely. I want to come back to that. Then you were at Recovery for Athletes and Therabody, creators of the Theragun. Very familiar with the Theragun. I'm sure our viewers are familiar with that. We'll come back to that. The most interesting, at least just wasn't aware of what this was, and we talked a little bit about it on our intro call, was Sports Tech Tokyo, and you're currently a mentor/advisor for that firm, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it's part of a broader venture capital group called Scrum Ventures. But yes, happy to share more about that experience, which has been fantastic.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, so we got Gatorade, we got Therabody, and then, of course, currently you're with Tropicana Brands.
That's correct.
Awesome. Okay, so Chris, if you would, can you tell me how health and wellness have played a role in both your personal life and your career?
Sure, Michael. And first of all, let me just say thank you for having me. This is exciting. Health and wellness for me started at a very, very young age. My mom in particular was always very preoccupied, with what I was eating and what we were kind of doing as a family. And I got into athletics relatively early, like a lot of kids. I've got kids of my own now. You get put into sports, and it's a little bit of a see what happens, see if the child likes it, and some things stick and some things don't. One thing that stuck for me, which was swimming. So from the time I was probably third or fourth grade, I was swimming competitively year round. And that's something that I did throughout high school. And then in college, I did some intramural things, and I've kind of stayed close. Swimming has an organized body called master swimming, which allows athletes to kind of continue to compete and train literally until there's no end to it. There are 80 and 90-year-old swimmers who
that's
still
amazing.
Compete. Yeah. So that's kind of been the constant, sport, if you will, that's propelled kind of my athletic journey. But as you enter into adulthood, you start to realize, okay, I've developed all these healthy behaviors by way of always training and being very mindful of what I put in my body and just staying healthy and fit. And it's really become something now that that is kind of a defining characteristic of, how I think of myself, try to influence my family, things that I invest time and energy into. It all kind of comes back to, this balance between kind of life and fitness and family, and it's been fantastic. So I'm grateful for the chance to have spent some of my career supporting industries and businesses that are looking to add value into the lives of consumers or athletes or wellness seekers.
Yeah, I'm really loving how more and more health and wellness is becoming a must-have for the average consumer. Even 20, 30 years ago, it was really kind of a nice to have on the fringes. Most people weren't really obsessed with fitness. The most that you would kind of see is someone going for a run basically, like
Mm-hmm.
just trying to lose weight. But now, strength training, circuit training, resistance training, different modalities, whether it's gymnastics, whether it's swimming, biking. CrossFit actually played a pretty big role in this, I think. CrossFit really kind of opened people's minds. There are issues with it in my mind, but it
Yeah.
really did a great job getting people lifting, doing compound movements and divergent modalities, not just the elliptical at the gym.
I completely agree. And while I've never done CrossFit per se, I've done a lot of different types of training, strength, agility, mobility, circuit, you name it. And yeah, I would agree. I think what CrossFit did is it kind of made things outside of the de facto running and things that I think appeared old or dated, and really depending on your frame and how you're entering into where you are in your fitness journey, you can run 5 miles on a treadmill, and if you're not eating right, or if you're not, you may not see any benefit from it.
Yeah.
Whereas CrossFit, I think people were seeing more of a transformation in their lives and their bodies, which kind of fed this viral nature and kind of goodwill and word of mouth. And then I think that kind of gave license to then a lot of other different similar disciplines that were on the fringe that kind of said, yeah, like there's a lifestyle here, there's a culture component to it, which is really big. This isn't necessarily my words, but I've certainly I've heard described, if you think of kind of generations over time, some of the places that people used to go to congregate or be social have fallen out of favor. They're less relevant. People aren't necessarily doing the things they used to. And
Mm-hmm.
fitness, in some ways fills that void for a lot of people.
A
There's
lot of people.
almost a religion to it, because you're coming
Yeah.
together, you're having a shared experience,
The
and it's
struggle.
something, yeah, the struggle, it's a place where you can be vulnerable, emotional, and more than anything, it's a habitual thing, right? That there's repetition to it and there's consistency to it if you're willing to act upon it that way.
There's ritual, there's sacrifice, all the things,
Yeah.
all the things that religions have.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Before we get into your career, I'd love to hear where you grew up. You touched a little bit on your mother and her influence on your athletic pursuits. But yeah, where did you grow up? How many siblings did you have?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up outside of the metro Detroit area in
Okay.
Michigan.
Are you a Red Wings fan by any chance? Red Wings?
All the Detroit sports,
Oh,
Michael.
jeez. Okay. All right. All right. You and my brother would get along. I grew up a Vancouver Canucks fan. Still am. My
Okay.
second
Okay.
team. I became a Canucks fan in the '90s. They sucked so bad in the early 2000s, and so I adopted the Avalanche. And so me and my brother.
I can see where I know where this is going. Yep.
Yeah. So my brother was Team Fedorov, Team Yzerman, Team Osgood. He was a Red Wings fan through and through. My brother loved the Red Wings, and I was Avalanche. Go Forsberg, go Sakic, go Patrick Waugh. So we
Some
already have
epic
that.
teams, some incredible battles. I mean, that was actually my
Amazing battles
formative.
in the early 2000s.
Totally. And yeah, mid 90s. I
Yeah.
mean, I had the good fortune to have I had a good buddy of mine, and his dad was, GM of one of the regional kind of sports stations that carried, so it wasn't an NBC or a CBS, it was actually called UPN 50, and they
Yeah.
carried all the Red Wings games. But they had a box and they had tickets. So as the Red Wings were having this incredible run,
Yeah.
I was there. Again, I pinch myself even saying this because my wife and my kids aren't really into hockey, so I don't have a lot of ability to share it. But I got to go to the Western Conference Finals in '96. The Wings won that game, and then Game 4, where we swept the Phillies. I was there the night
Oh my
in
God.
attendance. Red Wings winning the Stanley Cup. I mean,
What?
to
No,
this
you were there
day,
with a cup?
yep,
Oh my gosh, man.
just
That's
wild. I would
amazing.
have been up. I guess I would have been a freshman in high school.
Oh.
It's dating me, but yeah, I mean, just incredible privilege to be part of that.
Wow.
It's wild.
What a rock star team, and Scotty Bowman as well, man, dude, like, just the GOAT of
Yeah,
hockey coaches, man. Oh my gosh.
yeah. But all
Very
those guys, I mean, I was swimming, and my club was in a suburb called West Bloomfield, and a lot of the athletes kind of lived in and around that area. I actually went to school with Sergei Fedorov's brother, Fedor Fedorov. But
I'm
several
sending
of
this
the
to
Red
my brother.
Wings
I'm
worked
sending this to my
out,
brother.
yeah, at this facility where I swam. So I would see Chris Draper and Darren McCarty and others. I was a skinny swimmer, so seeing a professional hockey player kind of
Yeah.
throw weight around in a gym was just like, wow. I don't know, how that's even humanly possible, but I was
Yeah.
pretty impressed. still would be.
That's amazing. I appreciate that story so much, man. Oh man, it's giving me goosebumps. That man, I was hardcore into hockey back in those days. That's really cool. Really
Yeah.
cool. Okay, all right. So grew up in
So,
Michigan.
all right. So, yeah, grew up in Michigan. I have a younger sister. She's 5 years younger than me. She was also a competitive swimmer. She actually swam in college. So we kind of grew up kind of in this swimming kind of bubble community. You know, that's kind of what drove our life for many years in terms of kind of where we spent our time. And yeah, developed great friends. You know, to this day, some of my best friends, while we don't live together, are still my swim buddies from when we were 8 and 9 years old. So it was a
Wow,
really neat kind of shared experience that's carried through my whole life.
that's cool. Yeah. Okay, so now understanding where you grew up, Ford Motor Company makes more sense.
It does. My grandfather, it was kind of predestined in some ways. My grandfather worked for Ford. My dad worked for Ford. And this was back in a time when, well, my grandfather was a designer and a teacher. Then he went to Ford. But my dad was at Ford his entire career. My wife's father, my father-in-law, he was at GM his entire career. So
Yeah.
you tend to kind of, at least a lot of people from that area, make their living one way or another, whether you're working for one of the big OEMs or you're supporting the industry in
Flying
some
them
way,
or
shape, or
something.
form. So yeah, me getting a job at Ford was, a little bit not a
Predestined.
huge, yeah, not a huge surprise. Also, just I can say with a tremendous amount of humility, I really didn't have a good sense of what I wanted to do, even midterm, let alone long term. But I was able to, use relationship skills. It was basically a sales position. So there wasn't like a huge technical component where I needed some undergraduate degree or discipline to be effective at what I was doing. So yeah, started at Ford.
Wonderful. And how did you make your way into Gatorade? Was that intentional, or did you just kind of wind up there and develop a passion after the fact?
Now, very, very intentional. And I share this, I've had the opportunity to kind of share,
Yeah.
not necessarily the the focus of something like this wouldn't be about my career trajectory, but when I have the opportunity, I certainly like to point out that very much equal parts luck. But for me, it was realizing after I went to Ford, Iconoculture was a consumer insights trend research company. I knew almost immediately that I wanted to be part of a consumer facing business or brand. Somehow I wanted to touch consumers. I wanted to see things show up on a television or on a shelf, or I wanted to kind of be part of something where I could kind of see it and feel it. And despite being, at that trend research company, I was still a vendor or a business to business type of a industry where we were selling to big corporations that were doing kind of consumer facing work. And I ran into this catch 22. I really wanted to be a marketer or a brand person. And, by virtue of not having any of that experience, I was continually told, like, nope, sorry, like, go get some experience over here. And then you can kind of do the thing that you want over here. And that was almost 10 years of my life, all the way through the auto insurance kind of Explore Information Services was acquired by Auditech. So that's really kind of one continuous experience
Mm.
for which I learned a ton. I actually got my master's during that time as well. But this was me getting rejected left and right, networking. Anyone, anytime I could get a hold of that had some experience, access, visibility to kind of what it was like to work at a company like PepsiCo, I was constantly trying to have those conversations and to try to position myself as someone who, has a genuine passion for this type of work. And ultimately, PepsiCo, I entered that business, it kind of like an offshoot in a supply chain capacity that was building a global innovation stage gate process. And I had a lot of innovation experience, not in food and beverage, but I was able to kind of parlay that. So, me getting into Pepsi was kind of like my big break in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. I was finally at a company that I was excited about, that was doing consumer facing
Yeah.
work. And then interestingly enough, Michael, because I didn't enter into kind of a marketing department and I wasn't attached to one of the brands, I was more in a corporate strategy function.
Yes.
I was told, like, maybe you could go do this and then you could go do that. And if you were lucky, maybe you could get a marketing. It was, and no one was, being rude about it. They were just,
It's hard to
corporate
get in.
America, Pepsi's huge, a lot of layers, right? And 2 years later, I was on Gatorade. So it's a little bit not giving up, a lot of conviction, a lot of belief that I could do what I wanted to do. And they say luck is kind of the intersection of preparation and opportunity. And it
Yeah.
was kind of me being in the right place at the right time. And yeah, getting to Gatorade was, transformative in a lot of ways. And even if I look back now, that 6 years that I spent there, while I will continue to have enriching experiences, I've kind of calibrated myself to accept there probably won't be anything like those 6 years ever again in terms of fulfillment and learning and just culture and the stuff I got to do. If you like sports and technology, and I probably had one of the coolest, best jobs you could ever have.
I mean, when I think about brands that are synonymous with sports, the top 1 and 2, and I don't know which one's 1 and which one's 2, they've got to be Gatorade and Nike.
Nike, I was going to say, I knew it
I
before you
mean,
said it. Yeah.
the two brands that are most like synonymous, quintessential. When you think sports, you think Nike and you think Gatorade, right? Like that's it.
Yep, I would agree. I think most people would. Hopefully, it'd be interesting, right? In 20 or 30 years, if people would have that same take. I mean, if those brands do their job, then I would say yes. But it's per the conversation we were having, kind of about CrossFit, right? There's kind of a democratization of a lot of things that used to be much more concentrated,
Yes.
and access to just information and technology and nutrition. I mean, it's really opened up a whole, a much more diverse landscape for which there's a lot more players.
Yeah, the internet has made it very viable to run fairly large businesses in the tails, right?
Hmm.
But the
Well
big
said.
fat, meaty center, like that's Nike, that's Gatorade. I mean, maybe you could throw a few other brands in there, but those two really are dominant in consumables and then in apparel.
Yeah, I think if you looked across kind of like the broadest, you open the aperture up as far as you could. That's a true statement. I think you'd find if you said, okay, if your frame was cycling or if it was weightlifting, or, you would probably,
Of course,
people who are really intimate with those would have, a more specific example. But
yes,
yeah, like across the board, those two
just generic,
brands. Yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Well, okay, man. So many things. What were the biggest upgrades in your skill set that you acquired at Gatorade over that first 6-year period?
I think that was the first time where I was really in a position to innovate with empathy. So, as I mentioned, we don't have to get into all the auto insurance stuff. It's like watching paint dry, but I was developing products and solutions for, actuaries. So it was very much about, and business to business is much more about kind of a very clear value prop. Typically,
Yeah.
it's either we can improve something or we can take cost out, and those pitches and those relationships are very, while there's an art of selling and relationship building, those things tend to be more transactional.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity at Gatorade to join the long-term innovation team.
Mm.
And Gatorade had the luxury of really having a pretty robust, kind of resource allocation across all the PepsiCo businesses. It's a very profitable, successful business. Therefore, they got a lot of investment in the business, both to fuel new products and to drive advertising. And I was part of a small group, and we were really trying to do something, in PepsiCo's language, it was disruptive. So there's innovation that looks at, okay, what's the next flavor? Okay, we do this now. If we pivot a little bit over here, right, we can kind of say, okay, maybe we'll get into bars or a different form factor. This, Michael, was like, how do we redefine hydration? Which, when you're Gatorade, and we talk to ourselves a lot, but I mean, your whole business is built around hydration. So to
Yeah.
think you're going to kind of reinvent or somehow redefine that was a pretty wild thing looking back. But I mean, to answer your question, the upgrade for me came with really putting yourself in a position to understand the needs, wants, the pain points of the person, the stakeholder, in this case, the consumer, that we were trying to create a solution for. So it's understanding what worked, what didn't work, what their needs were, stated or unmet. And then it was trying to kind of authentically create value for, or a solution for a problem that we felt like we could kind of articulate. And I don't think we ever, we didn't have it perfectly, but we did through the process. We did a lot of research, and we stumbled on this insight, which I found the best insights to be actually the most kind of intuitive and straightforward. So this insight is simply that every athlete is unique. That's it. That insight fueled 6 years of things, which I would love to share more about with you. I mean, it
Yes.
drove an innovation pipeline. The amount of, things we got to do both for consumers and athletes and for the brand all go back to this idea that every athlete is unique. And while it sounds simple and obvious and basic, you have to realize, I mean, Gatorade was, born in the lab, proven on the field. Sports science is a core kind of pillar of the authenticity of the brand. And having
Yeah.
worked there, I've literally, I did a lot of sweat testing through my time there. I got to sweat test in the same, kind of dungeon that Michael Jordan did his sweat test in. I mean, stuff where you're just like,
So
is
sick,
this
man.
real? Is this my life? Like, I
That's
can't
so
believe this.
sick.
But just to finish the thought,
Yeah.
you have to realize, I mean, Gatorade was a let's leverage sports science and let's build the best hydration product. So best combination of carbohydrate and electrolytes to basically meet the needs of all athletes.
Yeah.
So it's a one-to-many proposition. If you think about it, it's a bell curve, right?
Mhm.
We all have different physiological needs, but Gatorade had basically one product that was intended to meet
Yeah.
the needs of everyone. So this
Yeah.
idea that every athlete is unique is really provocative if you're Gatorade, because it's like,
Mhm.
well, shoot, if we're giving one thing to everyone, well, maybe Michael needs something different than, what Chris needs, or maybe this cohort has different needs or they need different, we went
Yeah.
down that path, and it was powerful. So I think the empathy and really putting, kind of a jobs to be done framework in place whereby it's very clear what problem you're solving, who you're solving it for, and you really have to stay true, to kind of that charter if you want to ultimately develop something that moves the needle.
How did that inform your decision making, and how are you able to measure success and failure for different experiments?
Yeah, it's interesting, the criteria that you use to, define success
Yes.
is critically important.
Yes.
It's a great comment because big corporate, CPG, PepsiCo, consumer packaged goods, innovation, there is kind of an expectation that if I give you this amount of resource, I'm going to get, you're going to launch a product, I'm going to get this type of return. What we were doing had no precedent. We had no benchmarking. We had no, examples out in the market to say, okay, we think we would, if we do this, we would be on this type of a trajectory, or we think this business could be this big. So it was really on us. And probably the biggest lesson that I took away from, some of the early years was we had to be storytellers internally just to build the right narrative around what we were doing. Because if you took kind of a very traditional black and white lens, you would say, whoa, you're spending all this money and time and effort, and you may not even launch something for 2 years. And when you do, you don't know if Gatorade's expectation would be this thing would be hundreds of $1 million, over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
We had nothing, we had no line of sight to anything like that. We had to reframe what we were doing and how, we should measure it as a business, because if we didn't, we would have been shut down in year one.
Yeah.
Finance would have said, nope, we're shutting this down. Like, this doesn't make sense. So I think just the power of understanding kind of what you're doing, and really, if it looks like something, depending again the audience or the stakeholder, if it doesn't look like everything else that person or that group has seen, you need to kind of educate them on how it should look or how it should be measured. That was something I've taken away, and I use that, even to this day. If we're doing things that feel like we're getting, it's very easy to default to some basic metrics, and if those aren't the right metrics, it doesn't work well for you.
So were you developing new products, or were you developing marketing campaigns, or some combination of the two?
Products.
Products. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this was really kind of the epicenter of product development and innovation, for which, once we had done some things, we kind of Gatorade almost allowed us to create kind of this entrepreneurial kind of team and culture for which we get to kind of do things that other groups didn't get to do. And
Yeah.
we didn't leverage a lot of the capabilities that existed by way of kind of advertising and marketing. We tended to kind of keep everything to ourselves, but ultimately, yeah, we were trying to build products and solutions.
If you're under NDA, that's totally fine. But I'm really curious, did anything come out of that lab that the general public would recognize? Like, oh, we developed this there. It's like, oh, shit.
Yes, yes. I mean, and this is where, I've done this enough to know it doesn't always, end with
Yeah.
this exciting thing that endures and lasts. So yes, first, most people wouldn't have noticed or seen this, but part of what we were developing was a way to democratize the very niche access that Gatorade Sports Science gave to professional teams.
Okay.
So the first 2 years of my time with Gatorade, I spent most of my time with athletic trainers, registered dietitians, strength and conditioning personnel.
Hmm.
We were trying, because the model was, hey, if we can make something work for a professional athlete, and then we can learn and we can add value to them at the same time. Then we can kind of try to translate that to, okay, how do we bring this to the masses? So
I see.
most of the things I did initially, again, if you were looking, you may have seen them. But I think if you watch an NFL game today or even an
Mhm.
NBA game today, 5, 10 years ago, the only piece of equipment you saw on the sideline was a green Gatorade squeeze bottle.
Yes.
Very intentional, right? In fact, I have a version here, right?
Look at that,
Um,
man. Feels like I'm on the bench
yeah,
again in a hockey
yeah,
game.
yep. And so that was a very protected equity, the green and the orange. And those were, given away to athletes and teams as part of kind of our service model. So Gatorade
Yeah.
services teams, they provide hydration products, equipment, access to sports science. And what Gatorade had been doing for years, which I certainly didn't know when I joined the brand, was they would take athletes that were prone to kind of cramping or, were struggling with hydration, and they would sweat test them, which is really a way to understand two things: your sweat type, meaning
Mm,
are you a salty sweater or are you kind of a clean sweater, and your sweat rate. So
mm.
how much fluid are you losing through sweat? Not surprising, if you've watched hockey or if you've seen really any men's or women's athletics. I mean, you zoom in with HD now and you see they are just pouring sweat. I mean,
Yes.
there are some athletes that are losing up to, 2 or even 3 liters of sweat per hour.
Shaq's got to be one of those.
Oh man. Yeah.
Did you ever work
Uh,
with Shaq?
no, never did. I did not work with Shaq. We tended to work more with those, what we call kind of practitioners, the tight support staff that's really looking after and taking care of the athletes.
Yeah.
But anyways, to kind of
Sweat
finish the
types.
thought here,
Yeah.
we sweat testing. By doing that, we developed the ability to help teams basically individualize or customize hydration plans for athletes. So rather than just say, okay, there's the cooler, go fill up, we were able to kind of scale through technology, the ability for an entire team to kind of weigh in and weigh out and get a personalized recommendation kind of before they took the field and after they took the field. And
Oh,
then the
wow.
support staff could actually deliver on that. So to do that, we had to bring in kind of equipment. So these new a different squeeze bottle. And then we were looking at trends, and the manufacturability of what you could make with a squeeze bottle had changed. So basically we started bringing colors. So Gatorade's iconic green and orange cap, while the orange cap is kind of still there, you look on a sideline today and you will see colors that match kind of the team colors, if you will.
Mm,
We built things that show up on the sidelines that the average kind of viewer wouldn't notice. But basically, through all this, Michael, when you think about what kind of impact we had, you go to a Dick's Sporting Goods today, you go to a Target, you will
yep.
see an entire, 3 to 4 foot shelf of Gatorade squeeze bottles.
I've
The
seen them.
initial brand was called GX. That all came from the work that I helped lead over that 6 year period
Mm,
of time, where we took the green squeeze bottle and we said, people want, again, go back to that insight. Every athlete's unique. If we're all
yeah.
unique, why are we all using the same squeeze bottle? I want
Yeah.
mine, this color. We built a 3D printed ability to kind of put your name and customize the all things that started on the sideline that we brought to the masses.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a whole form factor called the pod. It's a concentrated pod that works with that squeeze bottle. Those are still out in market. And part of that was a sustainability play, where send and ship products, from an e-commerce standpoint, shipping water is terrible. It's heavy. It's not good for,
So inefficient.
the environment. No, it really isn't. There's a lot of plastic in that. So this pod was a
Yeah.
way to basically say, hey, you got water, you fill up your bottle with water. We'll give you the concentrate pod. You pierce it over this, this kind of cap that we designed.
Yeah.
And you can make Gatorade kind of anywhere you want on the go. And that's where some of the different flavors and formulas. Ultimately, at one point, we had 9. We never released these to the public, but for pro teams, we had 9 different formulas, different
Mm,
levels of carbohydrate and electrolyte
oh,
based off of, again, your sweat rate. So
that's cool.
a lot of stuff. Really cool. Yeah, it's wild to be at my son's soccer game or my daughter's basketball and to see, most of the kids have a GX bottle or a
Yeah, I design
jug
that.
or stainless steel. I mean, you name
Yeah.
it. I can kind of go back and, it's worn off a little bit, but I still get excited every time. And that was my career goal, was to be in a position to say, I'm doing stuff that I can see out in the real world, that people can interact with, for better or worse.
That's amazing. Before moving on to Therabody, because I want to hear about the transition from PepsiCo to Therabody. Before you left Gatorade, had this proliferation of electrolyte supplements started taking off, the elements? Because I mean, that's kind of coming
Liquid
right at
IV,
Gatorade.
yep,
Yeah,
drip drop. I mean,
yeah,
no, the short answer is no. I mean, there was not powders in general were, it was Crystal Light, it was flavor.
yeah.
And I think now between energy drinks and kind of hydration focused, there's a huge spectrum.
Mhm,
And the lines are really blurry between
mhm.
energy and hydration and electrolytes. And yeah, you've seen liquid IV, you've seen just a whole, even Gatorade has put a much more meaningful, kind of emphasis on that. We were looking at it early on, Michael, because one of the things that our kind of little innovation group got to do was to say, hey, we have a unique product here that doesn't really fit. Think of a customized squeeze bottle. We had to
Yeah.
build an entire supply chain and go to market that allowed you to say, I want to order this bottle with this color ring, and I want to put my name on it. Gatorade or broader PepsiCo, their core competency is shipping millions of cases of product to Walmart.
Yeah.
So that the idea of doing a one of one in a PepsiCo system we literally had to build it from scratch. So we realized that this new thing we were building wasn't necessarily intended for the grocery store or
Mhm.
where most Gatorade is kind of bought. We really wanted to build an e-commerce capability. So we had to
Mhm.
stand up an entire from the ground up capability. And one of the things we realized was, well, no one's going to buy Gatorade online because, right, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. We
Yeah.
don't, that wasn't a problem we needed to solve. But what are things that we didn't have that would be, advantageous to ship online? Powders was one of them. So for a
Mhm.
long time, the team was looking very hard at, and that's where when you have the equipment portfolio that Gatorade has now, you have a lot of things that are interesting, that are more impulsive, that are driven now by a color, a trend, or a Caitlin Clark bottle or something like that. And you can
Yeah.
start to pair all these things. You buy the squeeze bottle, Gatorade's going to throw in a sample of powder, and then
Yeah.
suddenly you're getting trial and you're getting kind of awareness and you're building, a little bit of a pipeline, just virtue of what you're shipping online. So powders were very much in scope, but this is where I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with this idea of the innovator's dilemma,
Mhm.
but it's a Clay Christensen principle whereby, and he's like my North Star in terms of
Mhm.
kind of, at least from an innovation standpoint, where I probably learned the most and I'm truly a student. But it's this idea that, when you're Pepsi and you're Gatorade and you're $5 billion, right? And there's this nascent powders business that's starting to develop that, it's maybe worth $100 million. Like,
It's a
it's
blip on
hard
your
for
P&L.
Gatorade to say in the early days, right? It's hard to say, yeah, let's go chase after that. Like, no,
Yeah.
Gatorade needs 2 or 3% of growth every year on a $4 billion base. That's
Yeah.
hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, selling some powder packets is not going to cut it. That's shifted now as the category's grown. But
Yeah.
yeah, just to close off the thought, powders are very, and I think will be even more relevant going forward because of just the value creation you have for consumers, the perception that, I'm kind of getting a better deal. It's more effective to, for the manufacturer. So I think there's a lot of upside to powders.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, consumers are definitely using. I know a lot of the YouTube channels I subscribe to. I watch a lot of fitness content online. I mean, Element has got to be a sponsor of like 80% of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the hard part about building a brand is just, you're paying for all of those, ears and eyeballs, and you gotta make sure that's sustainable. But early
Yeah,
on, yeah, you kinda gotta just try to be at least where your target is or where your audience is, and
yeah,
you gotta
yeah,
tell them and tell them again and tell them some more.
yeah. Never stop. Yeah. Okay, so then how did the progression to recovery for athletes and Therabody? Now, these are two separate companies. From based on what I could tell, Therabody is the producer of various consumer equipment pieces, right?
Mhm.
Theragun being the most famous, but there are other pieces as well. And
Yes,
then
sir.
Recovery for Athletes is a retailer. Is it completely separate from Therabody?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. So I'll give you the quick kind of from to. So Gatorade, literally my dream job. I said this every day I was there. It never wore off. I felt like every day, even after 6 years, it was like a pinch me moment. It was kind of
Mm,
like, am I still here? Like, I still get to do the things I do. It was something that even to this day I look back, as you can tell, with a tremendous amount of fondness and
yeah.
appreciation for. But growth mindset, wanting, I wasn't bored or necessarily tired, but I started to think about the next kind of chapter in my career, and I wanted to really put myself in a position to qualify for more of a kind of a GM type of a thing, for which I had more scope, more accountability. I was doing more than just kind of, again, we were doing a lot within kind of the innovation team. It's one of the reasons why I stayed as long as I did. But in some, I wanted to challenge myself even further. So as hard as it was, as crazy as it is to leave your dream job, I took a chance. And Recovery for Athletes is basically a marketplace. So they're
Mm.
aggregating supply and demand. They do a fantastic job of basically, helping the average person who's in the market for these types of things discover and ultimately purchase. And then some of these things like a sauna or a massage chair, you don't see them out in the real world, and it's
Mhm.
hard to get them. So they do a phenomenal job of, again, selling, and then kind of the last mile, making sure it's delivered, and it's all of that. But that business was trying to kind of transform in a way that was, I think, common, when you look back to the kind of the pre-pandemic, kind of right before the pandemic. I mean, you had just a tremendous amount of venture capital flowing into sports, tech, wellness. You had businesses that literally had a website and an app, and a week later, seemingly they were $100 million valuation, and it just felt like
A
this was
bubble.
like, yeah. So I was kind of reading the tea leaves, and I had been doing a lot of strategy work for Gatorade, where we were looking at possibly a technology we could either partner with or acquire to kind of
Yeah.
build out our app and our digital ecosystem. So I had spent 2 years looking at kind of this entire landscape and seeing the deal flow and understanding, just kind of what was happening there. So anyways, the business was trying to transform in a way that was beyond just this marketplace model, where we were going to bring athletes more into the business model itself, and
Mm.
NIL was just popping at this time. So the idea was to kind of
Mm.
take more of I think what Recovery for Athletes does today really well. It does a great job with equipment, and they've done some supplements. But at the time, we were trying to basically put all of the needs of an athlete or a fitness or a wellness seeker in one place. So instead of having to go over here for supplements and over here for, I don't know if you remember, I don't know if they're as popular now, but digital training content and kind of video-based training, and that was really popping at that time. So we were trying to kind of combine all of these things into one experience, whereby basically anything you would need as an athlete, we could kind of fulfill from a digital, e-commerce standpoint. That thesis didn't exactly pan out. So the
It's very
business never
broad.
really transformed. Yeah, it was pretty ambitious. So I think, Recovery for Athletes today maintains their marketplace. And I left that on my own terms, just because it wasn't giving me what I needed. And I was, doing things, they needed a different, kind of way to operate that business. And once the thesis started to kind of pan out, I started to, again, just recalibrate around, okay, what's the next phase for me, which was Therabody.
Okay, cool. So you landed at Therabody, and what was your official role at Therabody?
I was director. I was leading product marketing, which I think is an insight or just a learning for me that I would share, which is that, I had kind of an idea of what that role was supposed to be like based off of my PepsiCo kind of CPG, and then getting to Therabody. That role was very different than what I thought it was in terms of what I was actually, kind of tasked to do. And, Therabody was a really interesting time when I joined, because they had literally taken off like a rocket. The pandemic was an absolute boon to that business and to just the overall awareness of percussive therapy and massage
Yeah.
guns. Yeah, Therabody and Hyperice were kind of like the Coke and Pepsi of that
Yeah. Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think there was a pretty quick market correction where you had certain OEMs and manufacturers that said, "Wait, I know how these things are built. Therabody's charging, $400-$500 for a device, or Theragun.
Mhm.
I can make one and sell one for less than $100." So you
Oof.
had
Ooh, that's
basically,
brutal.
yeah. I mean, you just go to Amazon today and type
Yeah.
in massage gun, and there's literally thousands of devices that all. The problem is, and this goes back to kind of branding and IP, and
Mhm.
they all look the same, for better or worse. Theragun has IP around the triangle, the
Mhm.
handle, but for the average person, and this time, right, the economy was starting to kind of there. It was a little less bullish, and I think there were a lot of consumers that looked at this and said, "Okay, I'm in the market for this, but wait, there's a thing over here that looks just like a Theragun. It's
Mhm.
$100. I don't know if I want to. I don't know if that $300 difference is worth it for me." So, anyways, long story short, it was, I think, a time in which Therabody had, I don't want to say peaked, but at least in its current phase of growth, it had really kind of gotten to a point that was probably, they had built a cost structure that was no longer congruent with the trajectory of the business.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you had a pretty tough, my time there was pretty tough in terms of just admittedly culture, and there was a lot of reorganization and layoffs. It was tough because I think there was a wave that the team had been riding, and then it, like a lot of things, right?
Start crashing.
Yeah, and the business has done well. And I think this is indirectly answering a question you didn't ask, but if you look at Therabody today and you
Yes.
look at the products they have and you look at actually how they market and how they, like the visual language they use, one, it's wellness broadly, and it's also very either gender neutral, or in some instances, it actually skews more feminine, because some of their
Mm,
products are now more around using kind of the IP that they have
yeah.
to provide wellness benefits that are more, I think at their core, they are all about, wellness, in the sense that I know the head of innovation and R&D there, he's a good friend. We work together at Gatorade. I mean, they're very committed to the science behind their products. So everything is validated from a claims and from a kind of a clinical research standpoint. So they really are putting, people and wellness at the forefront. But you've seen a proliferation of products that are, not just about athletic performance, which is really kind of where Theragun started. It was about kind of athletes, and it was showing up on NBA sidelines, and then
Hmm.
it kind of became mainstream pretty quick. But I think the market for just that type of device is only so small. So you've seen the business scale and grow into categories that are adjacent, that, their brand gives them license to authentically play there.
That's a pretty natural progression, right? That kind of halo effect.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's that's Ferrari, right? Like how many people are actually driving race cars? Like no
Right.
one. Yeah.
No, that's the best businesses find a way to acknowledge what's working and what's not, and pursue things that keep them relevant, and broaden their user base, and certainly from a shareholder perspective, right? Find new ways to grow the business, and I think they've done that.
What are some opportunities you see in either the CPG wellness space or like equipment space that are great ideas no one's doing?
It's a great question. I don't know if anyone has cracked the code fully. I still think there's an opportunity around biometric physiological data that we're all collecting. The rings, Whoop as a band,
Aura
and
or
Aura.
Whoop,
Yeah, I spent a lot of
Apple.
time talking with those. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the things that we are already wearing right on our wrists. I mean, they are giving us insight into into our behaviors. It's still, I mean, I think Apple does a pretty good job because they have kind of like a closed/open ecosystem, but still kind of that so what in terms of like what it means, and kind of making that easy to understand for consumer. I think that's
Yeah.
still a little bit elusive, but I don't
Yeah.
know if,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
there's ever, given just how complicated I've worked, that one of the things we did at Gatorade was we actually took that sweat testing I was mentioning, and we democratized that to the masses through a
Hmm.
wearable sensor.
Wow.
And by doing that, we had to integrate a lot of different data from a lot of to really provide a user experience that was seamless and that was value added. But the incentives, right, to share data, right? If you're Garmin, or if you're not trying to kind of,
Yeah.
you're trying to sell watches. There's these agendas that I think prevent us from getting to something that could be, more holistically
Yeah.
beneficial to people. But it's interesting. I've spent the last 2 years focused on figuring out how to sell orange juice. So I haven't, outside of my own personal free time, spent a
Yeah.
lot of time, Michael, thinking about kind of what's working, what's not. I mean, by and large, I think there's a lot of really great products out there that are doing right by brand and consumer engagement, and nothing to me feels like there's something low hanging fruit that, like, oh, I can't wait for someone to figure that out. It feels like I know in my heart there's multiple things out there that no one's
Yeah.
doing that should be done. But again, it's probably why I'm selling juice, right, and not selling the next thing. I don't have the answer.
Hey, all good. Yeah, I wanted to get your perspective on that. Tell me a little bit about Sports Tech Tokyo.
Yeah. So again, going back to Gatorade, I had access to a lot of different. There's a startup incubator called Plug and Play. They're West Coast based, and access basically through conferences and just through different forums. But I got connected to someone at Sports Tech Tokyo, and then he approached me kind of with the idea that, hey, we have a lot of people, we're investing in sports and technology. I see what you're doing at Gatorade, would love to, get you visibility to the things that are in our pipeline and portfolio, such that it may be beneficial to Gatorade. So it was really something that kind of showed up a little bit on a kind of a silver platter for me, because the value, for sports tech or the companies in their portfolio was, hey, if I can partner or pilot or do something with Gatorade, I mean, that could be huge, right?
Huge
In terms
validator.
of
Yeah.
exactly
Social proof.
validation,
Yeah.
access, you name it. But through that process, I got to be really good friends with, one of the partners. And, over the years, we've been able to kind of trade notes on, what he's seeing in the industry and kind of what I was seeing at the time in Gatorade and what we were looking at. And again, there was no real secrets being traded, but it was just two people who had a lot of heart and passion for what was happening in sports and fitness and really nutrition as well, especially with Gatorade. That was definitely an angle. So, Michael, I had the privilege to chat with a tremendous amount of really incredible entrepreneurs, everyone from people who were, trying to decode athlete, genomes and kind of microbiomes to figure out, enzymes that would be transformative. And again, a lot of different IP around movement, and, kind of sensors and things like that. But long story short, through this sports tech group, I've been able to kind of, help. Again, advise is probably a strong word in the sense that, I'm not an entrepreneur. I can kind of see the world and help, younger entrepreneurs who are in sports and tech kind of see the world through the lens of like a big corporate.
Yes.
What are the things that you need to think about that would be attractive to a PepsiCo or a Gatorade? Or how do we think about, instead of solving all of this, right? What's just the first step we got to do? How do we get the next thing off the ground? How do we think about athlete orientation in an authentic way? How do we think about validating, hypotheses and theses and things like that? So I've been able to do that over the years, a little less so now, but a couple years ago, I had the chance to go out with the Scrum team. They had just started a new fund around health and wellness, and they were launching it. And I got to address about 100 of their portfolio kind of entrepreneurs. And I talked about a lot about kind of the sweat patch and the app that we built, because a lot of the things they were doing were kind of in and around that. But anyways, it's something that has given me value, and I hope I've given value back in return for the groups and the teams I've been able to connect with over the years.
Is this primarily venture capital?
Yes.
Venture. Okay. Got it. What are some of the big mistakes that you see entrepreneurs making when they're trying to sell to corporates? I'm asking because I know there are people in my audience, I'm thinking of a few specifically, who are trying to sell to corporations right now, whether it's a service or a product. And so what are some of the big mistakes you see people make when they're trying to approach that?
I think it's hard to have empathy if you don't know what corporate America or a group may be looking for. So it's easy to show up with probably things that you think that group would want to hear, but they're actually not even close to what that group kind of wants to hear. So I think having the ability to, one, be honest with whatever feedback you get in some of those early conversations, and understanding that what corporate partner, depending on how the context is, like, again, you're not going to get acquired after the first meeting. So, realize there is a multitude of things that would need to happen, and you don't need to solve them all. You just have to kind of be very clear on what your business is, what it does, why it works. And I think also being really candid around what you need from, what is the ask? What are you trying to do? What would working with PepsiCo or Gatorade or Brand X or Therabody, what would that do for you and why? And then to the extent you can, right, how does that then create value for Therabody, or for even more specifically for their user or for their consumer or for, their audience? I think, the times I've seen things go sideways is when you have a team that isn't really prepared to answer these questions because they haven't given them enough thought, and it just so there's more. I think there's a level of preparation that I think sometimes it's not that there isn't prep, it's that what was prepared wasn't the right thing to
Wasn't the
prepare
right
for.
stuff. Yeah.
So those are kind of generic things, but in general, I found most entrepreneurs, especially that have been able to kind of develop some product market fit, to be really articulate, really well suited to have those conversations and to make them productive.
Yes.
I think the other thing, now that I'm thinking about it, is probably just the other thing I've observed that may be relevant to share would be, you have to give up a little bit of, you certainly want to hold true to your values and the core of what you're doing, but, realize the direction a big partner may want to take you isn't what you had in mind, or even maybe as related to kind of what you think your business should be about. So it's kind of like, are you willing to kind of be flexible? Are you willing to put yourself in a position to learn, or to give something that you wouldn't maybe have done otherwise, again, for the chance to maybe prove something out that you wouldn't have done otherwise. I think I've seen things where people kind of stick to their guns and then they miss what could have been, a really compelling opportunity because they were maybe a little bit more narrow, or they weren't willing to kind of,
Mm,
because, you spend all your time and your effort and your energy, you put your heart and your soul into something. And then someone comes and says, well, did you think about using it this way? Or we want to use it over here. You're like, no, you need to use it. Like, this is the way it should be used. And either you kind of stick to that conviction, or you say, yeah, you know what? I'm open to thinking that way, or let's try it, or, let's understand what that could look like. But I would say being open and flexible is something that is, I think, helpful when you're dealing with a corporate entity.
that's such a dance, because to get something off the ground that has never existed, you have to have conviction and you have to have an ability to push through naysayers. But if it's too strong, then you will miss on market signals, right? Which is essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it ultimately goes back to the idea of like, what is, your objective as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur? What does this meeting potentially represent? If it's a key from what you believe, it's a key part of, again, whatever success looks like for you, then you have to be, I think, open to kind of putting yourself in a position to, at least learn or take a next step to kind of see where that path goes. Or to your point, you kind of double down and you realize, like, saying no isn't a bad thing either. I'm not necessarily saying you have to totally cater to the whims of, you just have to realize that what they may want out of you or the next step may be slightly different than what you were thinking. And you should be intentional and thoughtful about if that's kind of the right way to go.
Yeah.
Knowing what you're optimizing for is a big learning. Again, more of a generic one, but oftentimes teams and conversations go sideways because, someone is focused on the wrong thing, versus if you know what you're optimizing for, which could simply be learning, right? We're
Yeah.
trying to validate X or Y, or we have a hypothesis over here. This is a chance to prove it out. That's what success is, right? We're not
Yes.
getting acquired next week. We're not getting a new set of customers. We're really just trying to put ourselves in a position to learn. Again, if that was the thing you were optimizing for, sometimes it's not.
Wonderful. So now you've landed at Tropicana. Is there a health and, I mean, it's orange juice, right? And that is extremely healthy for you. I
When
was
drinking
kidding.
in moderation, but yes,
That's right. That's right.
comes
It's,
from a
yeah.
fruit, right? The cool thing about the product is it's literally just 9 oranges squeezed and that juice is put into a bottle. There's nothing else, which I don't, I think that's, orange juice isn't exactly the trendiest of beverages anymore. It's more of like the household staple that kind of gets passed
Yeah.
on from generation to generation. But again, in a world where, the chemistry and the R&D is so sophisticated in terms of flavors and functional benefits, but a lot of those things aren't naturally developed, right? They're
Mhm.
developed, with artificials or ingredients that, you'd look, that as a discerning person, you may think twice about. Orange juice is just juice from the fruit. That's it.
Are you procuring most of that from California or from Florida or overseas, Australia?
Actually, the global supply chain really now runs through Brazil.
Brazil.
Um, yeah,
Oh,
yeah. Brazil's got the best oranges in town. They got the most of them. It's really sad, and again, probably not topical to your to your audience,
I
Michael.
didn't
But
know that.
what's happened to oranges over the last decade? It's really, there's a basically kind of a virus or an epidemic called
Greening.
greening. Yeah,
Yes.
that's really challenged. The domestic crop,
Especially
specifically
Florida.
that in Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it endures, and Brazil is where it's at the moment.
Okay. Yeah. I know they've been trying to keep that out of California with modest success. Florida has been pretty decimated, and Texas too.
Yeah, yeah, but those are the three. That's exactly right, and it's hard. It's really, with as many smart people are trying to figure that out. There's no real
Yeah.
easy solution to it. It's starting to impact Mexico now, and even Brazil is succumbing a little bit to it. So it makes for very interesting problems to solve in my
Yeah.
current role, in terms of seeing kind of the bigger picture. And yeah, lot to think through.
For sure, for sure. Tell me a little bit about your current wellness practice. What type of training do you do? Where do you spend your dollars when it comes to health and body maintenance?
Love the question. So for better or, well, for better, it's not the right way to say it. I've never really fallen. I mean, I've been fit basically since high school. I mean, there
Yeah,
is probably, and I'm not like a
you
methodical.
look
I'm in the
fit.
gym 6 days a week, but one, I have just genetically, I've got a good metabolism, but
Yeah.
I am at a minimum 2 days strength, which really for me now is kind of like I will do two basically mini kind of circuit workouts. So I will do a core exercise, I will do a leg exercise, and I will do something upper body. And I will
Mm.
do I will do basically a 3-set circuit. And then I will do another version of that. And that's 45 minutes. And that is my go-to. I think the variable for me, which is a function of kind of weather, and I live in Chicago, so it kind of goes with the flow. But
Yeah.
I love running, but in the winter I tend to retreat, and I don't. So my cardio, I have to find kind of other
You don't
sources
want
of
to run on
cardio.
black
But
ice? That's not
no,
attractive to you?
no, I don't. I don't. So, but I found over the years that, first it was triathlons and then it was, other things, but I did master swimming kind of mixed in there, but I've done some endurance races. So I've done a race called the Imogene Pass Run 3
Mm.
times now. It's a 17-mile run in Colorado where you start at
Oh,
one
wow.
town and you run 10 miles up and you run 7 miles down, and you get to 13,100 feet. So
What?
training in Chicago, yeah, it's like a 5,200 feet of vertical gain. It's been a great
What?
challenge for me because there's no hills, there's no altitude here, so you really almost have to train like a marathon to kind of compete this,
Yeah, no
to
kidding.
complete this race. So I'm doing more things like that now because I find having something to kind of train for is motivating. And those races, Michael, are a gift because they're very hard, especially when you're not acclimated or anything like that. But
Jeez
you're
Louise.
surrounded by, if you like mountains or if you like, I mean, some of the most gorgeous things that just take your mind totally away from any pain or mental things that you may be kind of going through. They're very reflective, and they're really, for me, I'm competitive and I've kind of pride myself on my fitness level, but going out there, it's very humbling. You'll see people that are far older than me just kind of scampering up the mountain or scampering down, and you're like, wait, who is this?
What?
Who is this guy?
Okay,
Yeah.
hold on. Chris, I gotta pause for a second. Hold on. I'm still getting over 13,000 feet. Now I'm trying to remember. A mile's about like 5,200 feet, right?
Yep.
So you're like over 2 miles in the air.
Yeah. 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 The air's a little thinner up there.
I mean, at least 10,000 feet, you've got to be like, do they have oxygen station? They must have oxygen stations for people. No.
No, I mean there's aid stations, so you can get, I think they use Trailwind as their hydration, but yeah, they've got, like you would in any kind of, running type of a race. There's like 3 or 4, private spots across the course where you can get hydration or whatever. But there's not. I mean, most of the people who do the race are natives of Colorado. They
Yeah.
live in Arizona. They're more,
Mountains,
they're
I
kind
guess.
of calibrated to that
Yeah.
altitude. Just
Do
the
you at least fly out like 2 weeks ahead of time and like stay at
No,
altitude?
this year I flew out, yeah, Thursday, hung up Friday, and then the race was Saturday. So
Goodness
you
gracious,
just
man.
gotta, you just gotta go. You gotta push yourself,
You
man.
gotta do it, man. Oh my, I would pass. I
Yeah.
would faint, man. I would faint. Like I would
But
run. I've blacked out before. Twice in my athletic career. Once I was front squatting while in a calorie deficit and blacked out, like just with the bar on my
just
collarbone.
Yeah, that's dicey. I used to work, and we're still super good friends. Probably the craziest guy I've ever worked with or known from just a fitness. His dad played in the NFL. He played college football at Yale, and this guy never stops. He's like 6'2", 240. He's just like a mountain of strength.
That's huge.
And again, as a swimmer, I was always it was easy for me to just like, okay, throw on some running shoes and I can just kind of go.
Yeah, your aerobic
It
capacity was
was
very high.
I was, I had some strength, but it wasn't like, it wasn't like basic core movement strength. So it wasn't like bench and squat, like, those things I could do with varying degrees of success. But yeah, I've had instances with him where we've been doing kind of circuit training and I've been pushed to kind of like my absolute limit where, 2 seconds away from either passing out or hyperventilating or throwing up or something like that. But those things, you need those every once in a while just to
You do.
actually, you know what I just did? I live, I don't know, 0.8 of a mile away from Lake Michigan, and
Mhm.
I take every opportunity I can to go hop in the lake and do it's not like a proper cold plunge, but I was in there today. It was probably,
It's
I don't
not a
know,
proper cold plunge.
55. No, it is. It's not like a cold plunge tub or anything like
Oh, I
that,
got
but
you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so I do those, and yeah, I think I spend most of my money now. I mean, I just go to our local gym, so I'm not, Equinox or anything fancy because I know what I need and I'm good. But most of my money is spent on nutrition. So
Okay. Yeah.
it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
supplements, everything from protein to different subs. I mean, I'm not taking anything I shouldn't be taking, but that stuff is where I kind of end up spending, most of my Amazon auto renew subscribes are all, my wife's always like, what did you order now? And it's always something.
I need my isolate. Do not touch my isolate.
Yeah, yep, yep. I got my I
Nice.
got my stack.
When you say protein, are you talking about powder, or are you talking about there's specific like meats and proteins that you like paying up a little premium because I need my special Alaskan salmon or whatever?
No, no. And again, I'm slightly discerning. I used to. There's I don't know if I think it's still exists. There's a company called LabCorp that will go and it's like a third party review and they'll
Yeah.
validate efficacy and things like that. But no, I'm way isolate. I look for either NSF or I kind of go back and forth between a couple different brands, but I'm not buying anything truly exotic or anything over the top because at the end of the day, I'm 40-year-old dad with two kids
Let's
working. Like I'm
go.
not going to the Olympics. I'm just trying to stay fit, stay healthy, and that's it, man. That's the criteria. So if I can do that, and I feel like I've got kind of the right, it's more than just protein and supplements. We try to eat good as often as we can. So eat a lot of protein, lean protein, fish, chicken, things like that. Rice. Don't do a lot of treats. A lot of strong will in this household. Good discipline.
Good on you, man. Good on you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't say the same, can't say the same for my household, especially coming into this time of year. So, where can people check you out, Chris? I know you're on LinkedIn. I've seen you there. Is that the main place you kind of live online? Do you have other sites?
Yeah, I mean, I have an Instagram account, but it's not professional or it's not unprofessional, but there's no
No work
professional
stuff. Yeah,
orientation.
that's
It's
fine.
just me and the stuff I do with my friends and family.
Awesome.
Yeah, but LinkedIn and happy to be a resource to any of your listeners and anything I can do to help. I've benefited a lot from people who have given me time and wisdom over the years and to the extent I have it, I'm happy to share, or network or whatever I can do. I tend to be a big believer in that because I know it comes back around.
I'm greatly appreciative, Chris. Final note: are there any charities or organizations that you'd like to shout out?
I don't have one in particular. I'd probably just plug the Red Cross. That's where blood or monitor whatever, but that would be my one.
Awesome. Well, sir, thank you so much. You have a
Yeah, thank you,
wonderful
Michael.
rest of
Appreciate
your
it.
Sunday with your family, and we'll stay in touch.
All right, be well. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.